Hello, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. We are studying in the book of Micah. We've come to chapter 2, verse 9. We left off with verse 8, which is in the midst of Micah's words of rebuke against the false prophets, against the leaders of the people of Israel, and for the way they abuse and take advantage of the people. He declares that he is full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of judgment and of might to declare. 1 second here. I felt like last time I wanted to say a little more about judgment and of might. Because, to declare what? To declare sin. To declare what people are doing wrong. And say it's not he who says, bad things have to happen to people personally. That's up to the Lord. But we always know, in terms of judgment, that actions have consequences. And it's said actions have consequences. There's forgiveness in returning to the Lord. That's the message of the New Testament. It's in the Old Testament too. In Ezekiel, but the New Testament has taken on a more solid form, a more precise form, in that it's a little more certain being received when we come to God sincerely. I mean, even the Old Testament's there too, but it's much more emphasized, let's put it that way. And we have the mechanism of our redemption built in that Christ was sacrificed once and for all. There's no question of legality. In the Old Testament, you could turn to God, but then there were things you had to perform, and it's not certain to what degree you needed to begin performing those things that you would know or have some confidence to know that God had received you. So there is a place for judgment. That's what prophets often do. They pronounce God's judgment. They pronounce God's... Yes, they talk about what's coming. A lot of times it's, if you continue in the ways that you've been walking in, God's going to come and he's going to destroy you. There will be consequences for what you're doing. And that is very often the form that the judgment of the prophets takes. Men, people are very shy about, one, calling themselves prophets, or two, actually making predictions, because there's scriptures on that. It says, if a prophet says something, here's how you tell a false prophet. If they say something's going to come to pass, and it doesn't come to pass, he's not from God, you will not fear him. And it always astonishes me that despite having that advice, the people will still follow false prophets who don't have a perfect track record. Well, excuse it for them. And why? I don't know. I guess because of forgiveness. We should forgive. Well, you can forgive him, but you don't regard him as a prophet. I like to think that, they can perform some other function, I suppose. They can be forgiven, restored, but someone who's going around engaging in false prophecy, saying God said and he didn't say, should not be trusted. At least in terms of that part goes. I'm not saying they shouldn't be trusted with some other thing. But they've kind of shown themselves untrustworthy in a big way, in a very meaningful way. And they could have been not just... The point is, even if you're just mistaken, especially like I've said about false prophets, if they continue in the same methodologies that lead them to that point, then that is not something. Then they haven't repented. They're still doing the same thing. We shouldn't lightly throw around the thought of a prophet. I've often said that a prophet is like, you're a prophet if you do what a prophet does, whether you declare yourself or not. So someone who goes around foretelling the future or saying what's going to happen, they're a prophet, whether they like it or not. Even though that's not the original sense in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it is the sense. But even in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, where it talks about how to tell a false prophet, if a prophet says something's going to happen and it doesn't follow, well, it already had the idea of future telling. Because there's often a lot of future, because they're bringing God's judgment and they're talking about God's will, and they're saying, look, if you don't stop, this is what's going to happen. Well, I think I covered that a little better. Verse 9, hear this, I pray you, ye heads of the house of Jacob, and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. One second. Sometimes the morning moments just fly by, and you're busy getting everything set up. There's no time to deflem the throat. But thankfully we have a mute button. Let's continue to verse 10. They build up Zion with blood, and Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest. And that ends that chapter. Micah's a quick book. That reminds me, maybe I said it in these studies before, but I'm going to throw it in here. I saw an atheist once and derisively talking about Christians said, never trust someone with one book. With one effing book, I think is what he said. But no Christian has one book. The Bible is 66 books. It's not one book. 66. I don't have one book. I've got 66. I got a library of books. And going beyond that in technicality, but the Bible is not one book. It wasn't written by one person. It was inspired by one God, but that's a little different. And it's like 10 people write books on the same subject doesn't mean one book. You couldn't even say they were all on the same subject because they're all very different. Except, there's similarity, like Micah and Isaiah, there's a lot of similarity. We're going to see that in chapter 4. There's a lot of similarity. They were contemporaries. Just like the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, there's a lot of similarity. They were written contemporaneously, or relatively so, within the same epoch, Okay, so now he speaks directly to the heads. What heads? Well, he gets to it. He says, rulers, priests, prophets, political, religious, I guess you'd say spiritual, whatever. So they abhor judgment. And of course he means righteous judgment, because they'll bring judgment down on you if you cross their path. They'll that's not right. And then they'll come in and bring the law down on you. The sun is exceptionally bright today. They're going to bring the law down on you. It's like I guess I think of that parable Jesus taught about the guy who owed his master much, and he went and begged forgiveness, and he threw himself at his master's feet, and he had pity on him, and then he went out and found someone who owed him a very small, trifling sum, and he had him thrown in prison. And that's a perversion of judgment, according to the Lord Jesus. It is, according to any sense of the word. It's obvious to see from the story, but it's not so obvious when you're deep inside it. And men, because they don't think God looks, they don't think God sees, they don't think he's really there, they will do terrible things. And I'll say this, it'll offend people, but those people aren't listening, so it'll take them years to figure it out. But like in the Roman Catholic Church, they have the people always just rip into them about the pedophiles, right? Pedophile priests. On some level, I look at that as a problem of unbelief. And I mean, if you ever talk to atheists, and they don't like to be defined in terms of like they say there is no God, because they realize that is in a debate, saying I declare that God does not exist is an extremely difficult position to defend. You can't defend that position very well, because you're trying to prove a negative, and there's infinite number of ways you could just walk around that question, that statement, say like, well, God doesn't want you to know he exists, so he hides. There's why? Well, then now it's in my court. I get to talk about why I think that. But there's millions of ways, that you could walk around that idea. And I've done that 1,000 times to greater and lesser effect, depending on the person's, how dense they are, essentially. So you talk to them and you find out they prefer to say it's just unbelief. It's just, that is what atheism is. It is merely unbelief. You say, Paul, that there is a God, and I say I don't believe you. And they call that the null position, meaning that if I bring to someone a claim that is not readily obvious and that I don't have evidence for, that it is most reasonable to doubt the claim, and that in and of itself is true. If I say I have a purple unicorn in my barn, it is entirely reasonable for you to say I don't believe you. Okay. Especially if I don't provide any evidence, I just say so. Especially if you find me untrustworthy. You've got reasons to mistrust me. But I think the problem with that is unbelief is so broad. I mean, that's unbelief. I mean, that's in the Bible. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. If atheism is merely unbelief, then these pedophile priests are atheist infiltrators. If that's all atheism is. And I'm not saying they're truly atheists. Some of them doubtless are. There are a lot of infiltrators, and the institutional churches are loaded with infiltrators who don't believe, who are essentially or practically or absolutely atheist. Atheists aren't a solid block of people who don't believe. In some sort of organization, they're not like a unified church or something like that, on large. But they are, but it's because it's not really a belief system. It's a system. It's not a system at all. It's just, it is unbelief. Okay, it's unbelief. But like I said, you cast too wide a net. They need to find some other way to define themselves, is what I'm saying. It's not really helpful to define yourself as unbelieving, because someone who would put on the priest robe and then do that to a child, there's some level of unbelief going on here. No fear of judgment. They abhor. There's an abhorring of judgment. There is a, it's hard to term that as some sort of devout, godly, belief, full of faith action. That's why I've never really picked on it. And I also when I think about some of the actions people take, my wife told me a story of when she, within a year or so, it had to be before she met me, though at the time it seemed like ancient history. It must have been recent because of just the timeline of our lives. She worked at a place where she was working with retarded adults, and there was a sort of a manager person there, he was definitely in the institution, above other people. And he was studying to become a man of the cloth. And my wife, one of the reasons that I found her so attractive was she asked so many interesting questions about the Bible, a subject I was very into when I was 20, and she was much more interesting than other girls who seemed to have no interest in that. So she had all these questions, and here's someone who says, I'm studying to be a man of the cloth. I'm going to be a reverend like my father. And that's a hint right there. You know, following in Dad's footsteps is not always the best reason to do it. So she persisted in her questioning of him, and then one day he became frustrated and said, don't take it so seriously, it's just religion. And then immediately she said that over his face she could see past the realization that he had just said something extremely revealing and offensive, or it should be offensive. I believe she found it so shocking, that he had made a shocking admission that there was a deep unbelief abiding in him that said, this stuff isn't really important, anymore. I mean, it's like if I'm working at McDonald's, I've never worked there, and it's just hamburgers. I know to McDonald's Corp, it's everything. I mean, it's Big Macs are the world, but I'm working there. It's just burgers. I don't want to keep them clean. Don't get them dirty. Keep it sanitary. Cook them right. Just do it. Just deliver the product, right? And deliver it with a smile. Give the customer service that's due. But like nobody believes in McDonald's who works there as a grunt, And I'm sure, I don't know, high up, I don't know. Is it a cult-like existence to be a upper-level employee? I doubt it. But there's no altar. They don't worship McDonald's. When they go home, they don't pray to McDonald's, Yet, people who believe in the Lord go home and they worship the Lord. People, when they go into their secret chambers, they kneel down and they pray. At least that's what serious people do. Because, I get alone and I'm with God sometimes. At least in my mind, my mind is turned towards the Lord. Even though I try to remind myself it's more like this than like this. Because he sent forth his Spirit. I speak to him like right here. He's very quiet. It's like, the truth, the Spirit of the Lord, and the truth. And I did this in this study called Walking in the Spirit, where I kind of explain my views on that. God can certainly speak with a clear and loud voice. But not sometimes, but it is usually very difficult to tell the difference between your own thoughts and things that the Spirit of the Lord is bringing to you. Because that's someone I had a lengthy discussion with once declared to me that he realized that he could see that he said he didn't believe in free will and he didn't believe in God, and he said that he thought that his thoughts, like he sees his thoughts as an observer, like he just watches them pass by. And I said, and he said, I don't think my thoughts just come into my mind. I'm like, that's a very interesting thing. Where do they come from? They just pop out of nowhere. And it's kind of an interesting thought. Now, I don't have anything much to say about that because I just thought it was more interesting than a question of like, oh, I totally agree with you. Because I don't feel like I can observe my thoughts. I don't know. I've had, spent a lot of time thinking, and I feel like it's very directed. And I guess it's hard to see something as being disconnected from you. And that's why I think it's very hard to see the thoughts of God disconnected from our own thoughts. But a lot of those thoughts we have, like these things that like if you see a man of God and he does something and you're like, that's not what a man of God would do. It's your thought. But if your thought is equivalent to God's thought, well, it's also God's thought. And so I say sometimes it's a question of sort of tuning into the Spirit, tuning into the truth, because the truth exists before I come into the picture. The truth is always there. It's just waiting to be discovered, to be uncovered. I feel like I'm talking about this subject here, but I feel like I'm far afield. But I'm not really. It's just false prophets, false teachers, false leaders. And at the root of it, unbelief. Why do they do these things? Why do they hate judgment? Why do they pervert all equity? Because they think it's irrelevant. The judgment of God is irrelevant because it's just religion. It's not important that we follow these things. They're arbitrary and they get in the way. Hold on. Once someone said that he thought the primary motivation for atheism was sexual. Essentially, they can't stand that aspect of morality. And I think you see that quite a bit in society. That's the one they always try to push at. The self-control aspect of one's own sexuality. They don't like that. As much as they may even know that it is good, they hate it. They pervert equity. Things that are fair, having a fair, just scale, having things in balance, whether it be in relationships, I'm going to check equity because I just want to know what that word is. Equity is that things should come out even. Pervert all equity. So pervert is to twist, of course. And equity is yashar. Straight, right. Okay, yeah. They twist the things that are straight, Things, when they're set right in the world, they don't like, they want to twist it out of position. They want to take righteousness and twist it. And I think I see that in our society getting worse and worse. On some level, among some people. Among many people, I don't see it, but I do feel a sense that, like publicly, there are some, because of the spirit of the times, the things that are counted right have begun to twist what is truly right out of proportion. And that even here on YouTube, saying the wrong things about certain people could be, well, they can put a strike against you, And even when I start talking about certain sins and stuff, I'm sort of wondering, if someone bothered to listen to that, would I get some sort of, I think strikes come from like threatening and stuff like that, so you might be demonetized because it's not considered advertiser friendly. Now, I'm not monetizing anything, so I don't care. This is not a monetized endeavor. I don't even like that word. I like it in my commercial work, of course, but not in the Lord's work, because we read the verse that's coming up, right? They judge for reward, teach for money. I'm not here teaching for money. I'm teaching because I love the subject, I used to think it'd be nice to get money, but in a sense it's sort of burdensome. It's nice to be able to do it without having to resort to that, It's very liberating. Because when you're dependent on money, now people start coming in and perverting judgment on you, Like, and as I was saying, if like you say, I was thinking about it the other day, if you say something like, that's a sin, or you say that's not acceptable, something sexual, something people don't want to acknowledge as being sinful. Let's just make it generic. And they'll call that intolerance, and I find that annoying because it's like, no, I tolerate all the time. I tolerate. You're confusing intolerance with, you're confusing tolerance with embracing. Like, you're not embracing them. You're not hugging them and accepting them. Tolerance is not the same thing as acceptance. And that's where everything's going, is like there's a strong push in society And it comes from big companies, not so much the government, but like it is sort of like, thankfully we have the Constitution, and the freedom of speech. But the freedom of speech, you see, once the platforms become owned by corporations, like we have this amazing internet, right? And there's these platforms come up, and then users come in and make it big, and then a big corporation like Google comes in and buys it up. And then they start monetizing everything, and people get dependent on it. They start, using they start talking like I'm talking, right? And they except they don't get 5 views, they get 50,000, 500,000 views, right? And they say outrageous things, and that's part of why they get so many views. And if I stood up here and just was really outrageous instead of just sitting down like, okay, we're going to study the Bible, I know ways in which I've created viral videos, not for my own, but for commercial purposes, like things that were intentionally meant to go viral, and they were, and to do so, you do something somewhat provocative, right? And if you do that, the corporations decide, well, we're afraid that's going to offend people. They decide that it's going to be offensive, and they take your money away. That's why, for men of God at this time, I think it is good, work with your own hands. Don't be dependent on big corporations for your money. And if I could find if I had time even to figure out a better platform for this, I would. If I could stream it directly to my website, I'll look into that at some point. I like the idea of it being on this platform because that gives people I don't know or who haven't heard my teachings access. So that's good. People abhor judgment. And they talk about the leaders, but I'm just going to talk about regular people. I've spent a lot of time, trying to speak the truth about things in my life, things that I've experienced. My original teacher, Arnold Murray, was a false teacher, and it took me years to kind of sort out ways in which he had perverted my understanding of the Scripture. Mental freeze. Oh, and so I after a while of having sort of abandoned the teachings, I thought about it, meditated on it, and I decided to start writing about it. On my website, I have kind of an extensive blog, I suppose you could say, mostly of me emailing back and forth with other students and former students and interested parties in the activities of Arnold Murray and the Shepherd's Chapel, which is a famous ministry. It's on, especially late nights, on a lot of UHF stations all over the country, and also a satellite station. And so, every year I get a dozen or so emails, and thankfully it's kind of calmed down because I get tired of answering all these things. I get a dozen or so emails basically saying, Jesus said, judge not. Jesus did not abhor judgment. In fact, when he rebuked the Pharisees, he says, you tithe the mint and anise and cumin, is Matthew chapter 23, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. Jesus, when he talked about judge not, he was very specific in what he meant by judgment. Judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And what that means is you need to be careful how you judge others, because if you judge someone else and you are guilty of the same thing, you will be judged the same way. And as I've often repeated, the judgment of God is not up for debate as far as I'm concerned. Thou shalt not steal. I didn't say it. I'm not judging it. Though I could bring that up from my own experience. I could say, I've never heard of God, but I realize you shouldn't steal. Because someone stole from me once, and it made me realize, hey, you shouldn't do that to people. I didn't like it that they did that to me, so my conscience became aware of the evil that occurs when someone steals. And because I have empathy, I could sense that, like, that if I were to steal from someone else, they would feel the same way, and I would be hurting them. And at that point, at least for me, I would say, like, well, then I won't do it, because I believe it's wrong. We know what's right and wrong, okay? But things written in the scripture, like, it may not be. Now, see, that's kind of obvious. There are other sins that it may not be so obvious. I should get some blind. Well, I look over there and I see that. It's not so obvious why it's a sin. Like a lot of the sexual things, people say, well, if it's two people and they agree with it, if they're consenting, then what's sinful about it? And what's wrong? It's not so obvious, is it? It's no different than thou shalt not eat pork in the Old Testament. Why not? People, and I always hear Christians who believe in that try to come up with pragmatic reasons. They try to say, well, it'll give you trichinosis and God doesn't want you to get sick. It's a health concern. And I disagree with all those things. I say, no, it's arbitrary. God arbitrarily forbid it. Just like the Sabbath was arbitrary. There's no, I rested on the seventh day, you rest on the seventh day. That day is arbitrarily the day of rest. You know what I mean? Just because he decided. There's no cosmically, there's no reason of conscience you would ever come up with that. You would just be sitting around and saying, like without knowledge of God, you would just sit around and say, like, it'd be a sin not to rest today. I mean, after working many days in a row, sometimes you feel that way. I agree. But you see what I'm saying? I think there are some elements of righteousness that are not obvious, but God has said they're sinful. And in the New Testament, we have this sense of conscience. We have conscience to do things. So it is really incumbent on us to engage in judgment and to exercise good judgment. And the thing is, everyone does it. Everyone judges things. What we don't do is we don't judge people. Like to heaven or hell. We don't judge them. Though, you can say if they don't repent of their doings, it will not go well for them. It's conditional. I can make all kinds of conditional judgments. I can pronounce them. If you don't stop that, it's going to ruin your life. This is no strange, thing I'm engaging in. It's nothing forbidden either. And if I look at someone's teaching and I say he's a false prophet, he teaches lies, that's not judging them either. But you're judging them. You're saying they're false. No, their false teachings make them what they are. It is not a judgment on my part. What it is I'm judging things that they're doing, teaching falsely, prophesying falsely, and saying that's what a false prophet does. They need to repent. If they don't, they will be false prophets, and there's no good ending for false prophets who don't turn from their wicked ways, and it's a wicked way. And people hate that. It's like, it's my beloved teacher. Hey, how can you say that about him? He's turned millions to Christ. Because it's not enough to just turn people to Christ. We've got to turn ourselves. And if they're turning people to Christ with false prophecy, hey, fine. In Jesus' day, the high priests and the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin all condemned him to death. And that led to his sacrifice on the cross and salvation for the world. So, they're great guys, right? Just because God uses you doesn't mean like that, that's a pass because you were used of God. Like Arnold Murray helped me start learning the Bible. I don't regret that education. Though it was a little akin to being thrown into the deep end of a pool, as I've said. And not just that, you're thrown into the deep end of a pool and there's an old man there trying to drag you under. That's what learning the Bible from a false teacher is like. It screws you up. But sometimes unscrewing that is, you want to teach someone about knots, sometimes you give them knots to untangle. I certainly think that, it certainly helped me. I feel worse for people who can't get out of it. Perverted doctrines, the ways of the Lord are straight, and then they come in and they say, don't do it that way. Don't do it, that's not necessary. They built up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. That's cities are always the places where sin and iniquity abound. And it's funny, they always look at the country and they see it as like this fearful place in movies. They want to set it someplace scary. They put it out in the country, in the unknown. I think there was an author who said something about that. All the horrors that can go on in these isolated locations. And certainly that has. But there are far more horrors going on every day in any given city. There is blood and wickedness. You'll never see a prostitute standing out on my corner here. You'll never see a drug dealer peddling his poison down my road. Not until the day that it becomes a great city, and then all the people are brought together and all the wickedness is concentrated. They judge for reward, priests thereof teach for hire, prophets divine for many. And what do they say? Is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. God is with us. Isn't it ever so? That's a beautiful verse. It requires no commentary. Not that I won't give it some. I've already been commenting on it. I've been commenting on this whole section the whole time. Whereas we're more than halfway through, so I should have checked questions real quick. No questions. And the questions I look at are on the chat. And those are questions about the study today in the book of Micah. Or something I said yesterday in the book of Micah. If you post a question there and I don't answer it during the study, I very well may take it up the next day, especially as long as there is not many questions. And that's fine. There may never be. And that would suit me just fine. But if you have a question relating to the Bible that you would like me to talk about here, if you have a subject you'd like me to teach about on the live stream, you can send that request or question to questions@oraclesofgod.org. That's a special email address I have created for that purpose specifically. And I will look at that and I will take up those subjects. And just a reminder, if you like these Bible studies, you should subscribe. And also, you should like it. You should click on the thumbs up or whatever they use right now for that. I don't pay attention to those details. You click on the like button, and then you click on the subscribe button, and then you click on the little bell. The little bell means turn on notifications. I want to know every time Line by Line Bible Studies is on. And you want that because though I'm on a schedule, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. or so, Central Standard Time. Once my schedule clears up, my work schedule, I'm already itching to engage in single subject studies maybe on a Sunday or a Saturday, one or the other, probably early in the morning also. So you'll want to have the bell on so you'll know if that happens, if you happen to be online, if you happen to have your notifications turned on your mobile device. I don't even know how that works. But for more studies, I have hundreds of hours of studies on my website, oraclesofgod.org. For songs, I have dozens and dozens of songs from the scriptures. Scriptures, line by line, sung in my particular way. It's not necessarily easy listening. It's intended for an entirely different purpose. It is meant to be expressive of the feelings. I also have a YouTube page that's going to be focused on my music. Some people like my music, some people don't. So that's for you to decide, and I take no offense. It's not for everybody. I think every Christian ought to appreciate it, even if they find it difficult to listen to. So, they judge for reward, teach for hire. I mean, oh boy. It doesn't mean necessarily. Now, I have people, a person actually, other than family members, there's only one person who supports me in any way in this ministry. And support is, I would say, more like they reward my work. They send me a little $20 here and there. And I appreciate that. And a nice note, encouraging, it's very nice to, always makes me happy to see a message from them in the mail. It's nice. And also, even if it was just a note, honestly, and I'm not asking for notes because it'll drive me up the wall. Honestly, there's another aspect of my personality that when I see those things, I dread it a bit. Because it reminds me of, it reminds me of the gravity that you take on yourself when you start speaking in the name of God. And that other people are taking what you say seriously, and they're listening, and even willing to give up money that they earned to say, do it more, don't stop. I'm not going to read a note. I have a note over there, a really nice one, right? And I'm not going to read it on the thing. Remember, Arnold Murray used to do that. Read all the complimentary notes, whatever. And it's not necessary. Because if you like it, you like it. I don't need to tell you someone else likes it. What's the point of that? But my point is, I accept money from people who give it to me. People have said, you do this for money. And I thought that's laughable. The whole thing, a couple $100 a year. Because I get other people who occasionally will send me a little something. But I don't ask it. I accept it because if a gift is a gift, and if they want to do something good, that's fine. They feel led of the Lord, whatever. It doesn't need it. If you stop giving me if people have ever given me anything, this is still going on. If it goes to 0, it goes on. Because the only criteria I ever talked to the Lord about was that when I first started teaching, when I was 20, was that? No, I hadn't turned 21 yet. I think I might have even been 19, actually, now I think about it. It was right before I turned 20, so that's close enough. It was certainly in the year that I turned 20. I said, well, Lord, I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, leading a Bible study. But if as long as there's someone who wants to study with me, I'll keep doing it, as long as there's one person. And then he led my wife to me. She wasn't my wife, but he led Katie to me, and she became my wife. And now I always have one person who wants to study with me. So it's pretty much, this is going on. This is an ongoing affair, no matter what. Maybe not in this form of this live stream, but this live stream also isn't depending on money. It's just depended on the Lord convincing me that that's what he wanted me to do. So it's not dependent on money. But I'm also saying that, someone who is a real teacher, they teach. Like, let's say they at a university, and this is a full-time job, and they teach students. And I'm not saying they do a very good job at Christian education for ministers. I don't know. I feel like they know a lot of stuff. Like when I listen to ministers talk about, like I did Titus. I remember just for laughs, I watched a guy talking about Titus. He was talking about Paul's journeys and the boats and the blah, 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 blah. I'm like, and moving around. And, I touch on that stuff when I talk about Micah. He's contemporary with Isaiah. Micah might have been what? What if I was going to sit here and say, Micah was probably from the priestly class and blah, 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 about all this facts and figures about Micah that you could find in a reference book. And what's the value in that? So, what do they teach them in school? They teach them, well, when was this written? Did Micah really write it? And it's all about textual criticism and not about understanding the text, which I find fascinating because they don't do that with any other book in the world. Maybe they do a little bit, I guess. But primarily, and if you go and study English at a university and you're studying Shakespeare, there may be some question like, well, we're not, was Shakespeare really there? Did he really write it? Was it somebody else? Was this sort of like almost like a brand where various different people wrote it? Did William Shakespeare actually exist? Right, but they don't spend their whole time talking about that and trying to prove that and just dwelling on that. They do get down to like, what is this? Understanding the wits of, was it 15th century, 16th century England? Understanding what, and maybe it was even earlier than that. I wasn't an English major, okay, and I've precious little reading of Shakespeare in my background. I've read it. It's very difficult to read. And that's the point. It's difficult to read, and the Bible can be very difficult too. Why wouldn't you spend all your time just dealing with difficulty? And there are some places, that's usually called apologetics. I don't like apologetics though. I am more because it takes on a routine form. I don't want to be just set up in the position of defending the text against attacks. I can do that too, but I'm going to do it better if I just sit down and try to understand it for its own sake. And out of my own curiosity for, it's God's holy book, right? That's what we all believe as Christians for the most part. This is God's book. It's inspired by God. Why wouldn't I spend my time trying to understand it? Okay, but I'm just saying, and that's a long way to go around saying, but if someone is teaching the Bible, like what I'm doing, let's say I was doing this 8 hours a day. How am I going to earn a living if I'm doing this 8 hours a day? Obviously, it needs support. Obviously. But I wouldn't say that someone who was doing that was doing it for money. They could still be doing it for the love of it, yet living off of the proceeds of that. I can't do that. Not just because of money. It wouldn't matter if people started throwing money at me. I can't do it. I'm a father. I have a family. I have sons to look after. I have homeschooling. I've got to teach them. I even do home higher education and helping them get their start in life. So I can't do it. And so don't even get any ideas that that's what's going to happen. I'm not going into full-time ministry. I can't. But someone who's doing it full-time, they do. You shall not muzzle the ox that treads out the corn, as Paul used that as an analogy, saying, if someone's working in something all the time, you can't not let them feed from it. They that work of the gospel must live of the gospel. They can make their living off of it. So I don't think that's wrong. It is only wrong to do it for that reason, like that person I told you about that my wife encountered, Mr. Jacobson. That was his name. Whatever. It's just religion. So at that point, it's just a career you're doing. You're just doing this for a career because, you know what? Here's the thing. What if your entire ministry consists of just, I preach on Sunday and I preach on Wednesday? How much money is that worth? Well, they're a heck of a message. Yeah. Yeah, the people that, hey, some ministers make 6 figures doing this. Really? Ministers who just preach on Sunday and maybe a Wednesday or maybe just Sunday. All they do is preach on Sunday and they're making 6 figures. A lot of pastors do a lot more than just preach on Sunday. Okay? And I think that probably goes in direct proportion to their faith. It's like if you have a pastor who's very involved with his congregation, I used to be very against all sort of organized religion, but if a man in good conscience is serving his flock, visiting the poor, doing all the things that a guy who's in that position is supposed to do, going to the widows, having Bible studies with the old ladies, doing all the things, and working in the field all the time, and not full of idle time, sitting around in his house watching TV, or whatever. Or maybe like me, working a job. I'm working a job. Okay? There's no reason I should make a full-time Bible income at the same time I'm making a full-time other income. I'm getting double dipping, and one of them I'm not really doing. You know what I mean? So, I accept donations because it's not so... And even if they start rolling in, I don't know. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not doing it for that reason. You know what I mean? And the fact being that I've done it for so long, for so little. Even at times when I really could have used financial support. I'd never go to people for it because I didn't think what I was doing was worth that. And it's not. An hour a day is not a full-time job. It doesn't deserve a full-time salary. I mean, the way some people get overpaid. 6 figures for a pastor, he must be a heck of a guy. Even so, you know what I mean? What's your hourly pay at that point? What are you getting? $50, $60 an hour? That's quite extensive, you have to do a pretty good job. But the main thing is that they don't do it for money. That prophets don't speak for money, We're not doing it for hire, as hirelings, as mercenaries. Like in my work, my job, my self-employment, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to use the word mercenary, but I don't mean I'm a mercenary with a gun. I just mean my approach to work is mercenary. I'm doing it for money. I'm freelancing. That was the term of a person who had a lance and they were free and they could serve any master they wanted. I'm a mercenary in that respect. I have I have limits on what I'm willing to do for people, obviously. But that's something I set up myself. But I do it for money. Yeah. Some people, they do their job, they love their job. And they do it, even if there was no money in it, they do it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Like, I'd just do this for free if I could. Because it doesn't, that's not... And a lot of times they say that's, your sort of your dream job. But sometimes in life, the likelihood you're going to find something that you like to do, and you do it for nothing, and you would also get paid. Because I would do this for nothing, but it's, but the likelihood of me also getting paid doing it the way I want to do it, which is without any control, without any oversight of human beings, I answer to God. And then to people, here's the thing, it's like, I've had things I've said in the past where it's like someone was like, a student said, it really, I thought you led me astray in that. You made me cut off fellowship from people. And I was like, let me think about that. It's like, I guess, I don't think I meant it that way. I certainly wasn't living my life that way. It made me more careful about my words. So I am answerable to people. But they don't have me on a hook because of money. I'm only answerable because I actually care. But when you bring money into the picture, like in a denomination, then, I think one, it ties their hands. Like, it can't be about righteousness because like I go to a pastor and he's from a particular denomination. Even if I convince him that his denomination has some teaching, he has to basically forsake all, take up his cross and follow Jesus, so to speak. And not follow me per se, but he's following the truth. And they're going to crucify him in his denomination, figuratively speaking. They're not going to be happy. And he's not going to be able, he's either going to have to convince his congregation and split them off from the denomination, or he's going to lose his job. And money corrupts people in that way. If money is on the table and they're dependent on it, now they can't be well, they can be, but it creates a hurdle that they have to get over if they want to. If something comes to their attention, like, oh wow, like if someone's a Jehovah's Witness and they say, you know what, Jesus is God, that it becomes like a problem. Now you can't be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. But I built up my entire life as a Jehovah's Witness. Not only that, I make my living off being a Jehovah's Witness because I'm one of the preachers of that denomination, or some would say cult, and perhaps whatever. I mean, everything cult is like. I think it's a pejorative term. People use it to insult one another, but it is not. Cult is just the set of practices and stuff on some level. I mean, I think of it in the older term, and I don't think that like just labeling people a cult is helpful. Though it can be true, very true. So they do all this, and then they think, well, nothing bad can happen to us because we love the Lord. And isn't the Lord with us? I am persuaded that nothing can separate us from the love of God, that neither height nor depth, nor things present, nor things to come, nor any other creature, etc., 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 should be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus. And also, I know that all things work together for good for me, because I love God, and I'm called according to His purpose, or so I think. And I did a study, and you can find my website. And I'll put that up before we finish again. Called Confidence, or no, it wasn't called Confidence. It was called Justifiable Confidence of Salvation. Because we believe we're saved and stuff, but how do we justify having such confidence? It's like, well, because it says so. What's it say? It says this: if you believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, and confess with your lips the Lord Jesus, you will be saved. That's it. That's not it. That's not everything the Bible says. Well, that's the most important thing, and I can take that in isolation and put all my confidence in that fact, and put all my confidence in just the letter of the law of what that says, because that is essentially the approach. I can take a legalistic approach to the Scriptures and just justify myself and don't have to pay attention to the details. As long as I don't commit adultery, I can lust after women. As long as I don't murder, I can hate my brother. The same thought process that the Pharisees went through. It's just they've substituted faith. It's a legalism. If our faith is a sham, and we are doing this for money, don't think God's going to protect you. No evil. And here's the thing: even if God is with me, and evils come on me, not anything more than I can bear. Don't flinch at the fiery trials that come upon you. Look at the Lord Jesus. God was with Him. Look at the apostles, the prophets. God was with them. They suffered many things. The second to last verse of Philippians chapter 1. It is given unto you on the behalf of Christ not only to believe, but to suffer. So evil can come on you. Look at Job. Evil came on him. But the ultimate evil will never come on you because you trust God. He will fulfill His word. But if our faith is a sham, all the evils will come upon us. If we're just doing it for money, we should not think that, oh, well, I'm a man of God, so I have God's protection. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, and then they say it. Do they even believe it? Because a lot of times, like I said, there's unbelief within belief. Sometimes we have belief, yet we doubt. Doubt's a part of faith. It's antithetical to faith, but it's very unlikely for you to have absolute faith. Some people do. It's a great gift. I've always had faith, but also I've had doubts and shrewd. And that's all right. Peter doubted. Jesus rebuked him. Doubt not. I rebuke myself. Don't doubt, Paul. Don't be afraid. And over the years, he has helped me become more solid in the faith. And again, in a sense, it's having my faith tested has made it stronger. I have a song running through my head. It's from Jeremiah 23, all about the prophets. No evil can come upon us, for who has stood in the counsel of the Lord? Who has marked his word and heard it? They say. People say a lot of things, you know. They say what you want to hear, what they think you want to hear. And is it necessarily the right thing? Is it necessarily what they believe? I don't know. And remember that, you don't know. Don't trust people just because they say they're men of God, they're wearing a robe. Just because they're standing in front of hundreds of people. It's just, don't be just one more fool listening to them. And there's another one. You shall not say thou fool. Well, yeah, that's true. I'm just saying, don't be a fool. I'm not saying you are. Don't be fooled. It's about every idle word. We got to give account. That doesn't mean there's no justification sometimes for use of certain words. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps. What's that mean? Well, your city is going to be destroyed. Though actually here in Micah, this looks actually ahead to the Babylonian captivity, because Jerusalem was spared. In the time of Micah and Isaiah, the Assyrian was turned back, but it wouldn't be long. I don't remember exactly how many years, but it's a bit of time, 100 years later. But that's, in history, that's not a big leap. Though we look back 100 years and we think, wow. I always think it's funny to look back and be like, right now, 100 years ago, is the end of the First World War. And I thought to myself, when I was growing up, I realized when I was a kid hearing about World War II, those events were less than 40 years old. And 100 years, when I was a child learning about history, 100 years took me back to the 1880s. I was born in 73. So I'm a kid in school in 1980, 81. I'm learning about history or watching on TV. 1880. I remember my dad telling me when he was a kid going to a parade and seeing Civil War veterans, a couple of them still walking around. Or, I don't know if they were walking. They were probably riding in a car. It's like my dad was born in the 40s. So, yeah, they'd still be guys. They were old, like 90. Guys who have been teenagers and served, young men. Time passes oh so quickly. And Jerusalem, for your sake, shall be plowed as a field. And I'm going to relate that, like I said, all this Micah had, and someone asked me once, how can you, they challenged the interpreting of prophets today when what they had in mind was something back then. And what I say is just the principles apply across time. That if we, when the church, so to speak, when the church is engaging in this, and the leaders of the church, they're sacred place. What is Zion? It's the place where God's house was placed, the temple of the Lord. As Jesus said of the temple, in his day, he said, "There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." All the stones of this place are going to be thrown down. And this is hyperbole. Well, and also, here's the thing. Hyperbole to some sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that, everything's going to be removed. But there's going to be it's not going to be like a city anymore, because the people are all going to be gone. Heaps means ruins. Maybe plowed as a field means that there's not a city anymore. It's a place where people plow fields and lead out the animals. Isaiah also definitely touches on these ideas. It's going to be a place for goats to feed and flocks, and it's not going to be a bustling city anymore because of the way it's going to be depopulated because of the invaders. And the mountain of the house, the mountain of the Lord's house, that's what it refers to. The mountain of the house of the Lord as the high places of the forest. Tree-topped hills. You go into high places in the forest. You go up and down. If you have a place where you can, see forests and ups and downs. And one of those places, they're wild. They're just... Because that's the last place. You think about it. What's the last place? If you go... like when I drive west of where... I live in Illinois, which is known as a very flat state. But I live in northwest Illinois. We have rolling hills here. It's a lot more like Wisconsin or Iowa. There's parts of it, As you go west from where I am towards the Mississippi River, it becomes even more so. And I noticed that what happens, and when I go to Wisconsin, I notice this also, that the fields are plowed in the valleys, but the hills are topped with trees, and they're still left wild. And I'm sure there's a reason for that. But, when you fell trees, you don't start at the top of the hill and we'll work down. I mean, because the thing is, you wouldn't want to clear trees on a hill and try to farm it, especially a relatively steep one, because it would just all wash away. All your nutrients are going to wash out of the soil. Gentle hills, I think, would be different. I'm not an expert on farming, and by any means. I live in a rural area, but I'm not a farmer, nor what I want to be. Nothing against them. It's just that's it. I have a nice garden. So, if we engage in the same kinds of behavior, our sacred places will be overturned. Our churches, all this, and you see it. They'll say, "Oh, church attendance is down." People are leaving churches. They're not being fed. And then what happens is they're gathered then into these big... What happens to people, and this is the way I see it, okay? The little churches start, crumbling, and then come the medium ones, bigger ones. They create more programs and excitements, and people start going there. And then they get the big mega churches, and people start glomming into that, or they watch it on TV. And then those things ultimately do not satisfy, or there's a scandal, and you put all your eggs in one basket, and just many people fall away. And it's and they're led into and the fact that in their teachings they're not teaching the truth as it ought to be taught. They're not equipping people to follow Christ and to walk in His footsteps. They're not doing the work they should be doing, especially in mega churches, and the people are led into captivity, to sin, and to ignorance, and they're in darkness, and they don't know what they should do. They don't know, they don't know their faith. They don't know what it's about, because the ministers haven't gotten the proper Christian education very often, and neither do the people. And it's a tragedy, and it will result in dissolution and loss of people, as far as in the churches. Certainly in the countries where those practices are the most, not countries so much as, it's not a country thing. Think of it in terms of congregation by congregation.